there's not really another star on this roster that, you look at and say, hey, that guy can help Luka Doncic win a championship.
Would you fall for me like I fall for you?
Alright, everybody, welcome back to another episode of NBA Now. It's your boy Dom, and we're gonna get right into things here today. So, today, we are talking about the Dallas Mavericks, and more specifically, the handling of Luka Doncic. So I guess to start things off, we'll kind of look at their record, and this is a team that is barely kind of in the playoffs right now. They're in that, like, it looks like you're going to make the playoffs in the Western Conference, where they're 16 and 17 at the 8 seed currently. The 10 seed being the Spurs at 14 and 19. So that Spurs, Sacramento, Portland, Pelicans thing that's going on there is kind of competing for that last play-in spot. Everybody above that seems to look like they're probably going to make the playoffs, or at least the play-in in the Western Conference. And it's interesting, right? Because this is a team that I think a lot of people the last couple years have kind of been waiting to just break out, right? Because it's not like, Luka just entered the league now. Like, he's been in the league for a few years now. We've seen him continue to get better. And, now that he's in his fourth year, he had his rookie year. Then we kind of saw him make the playoffs his second year. So we were expecting this year, for this team to really break out and kind of be a top team in the Western Conference, having such a transcendent young player on their roster. And Luka's doing his thing this year. He's averaging 25, 8, and 8. So he's definitely playing well. But yeah, they just aren't doing better, which is interesting. Now Luka's shooting is a little bit down from his previous seasons, past two seasons, but not by a ton where it's like negative on the team. But when you look at this team, it's like we've been waiting for Porzingis to kind of be Luka's second star for a few years, and it seems like that's just not going to happen. It seems like Porzingis is kind of at best a CJ McCollum level player, like borderline all-star guy at best. At worst, he's just a role player, a glorified role player. And that's what it seems like he's going to be for them. I mean, so far this year, Porzingis is averaging 20, 8 and 2, which isn't bad, right? He's averaging over 20 points per game, which is good. But again, a thing that's kind of been throughout his career, this is a 7'3" guy that isn't even averaging 10 rebounds. And yes, his ability to stretch the floor helps out the team and everything like that. But it seems like he's never really going to be that second star next to Luka, right? So when you look across this roster, you really don't see anybody that could fit that. Now, this is a pretty similar roster from last year. They did bring in Reggie Bullock, who has been pretty atrocious for them this year. Only averaging 5 points and 2 rebounds per game this year. And his shooting splits don't look good. I mean, last year he was a 41% three-point shooter. This year he's a 27% three-point shooter. Last year he shot 44% from the field. This year it's 35% from the field. So complete opposite turn from where he was last year, and is not helping this team really at all, especially for the amount of money that they gave him. I believe they gave him a 3-year, $10 million contract with an option on the last year. I can't remember if it's a team or a player option. But regardless, the one addition that they made this offseason hasn't helped them. The other addition they made this offseason was the head coach. They brought in Jason Kidd. If you guys want to see more thoughts on that from me, make sure you guys go check out my Jason Kidd versus Luka Doncic video. I go into that in depth over there, so we're not really going to talk about that here today. But yeah, this team, there's not really another star on this roster that, you look at and say, hey, that guy can help Luka Doncic win a championship. Nobody on this roster looks like they could do that. Because, like, if you're looking at young players that could develop to be that, you're looking at guys like maybe a Jalen Brunson, who has his positives as one of the better players on this team, but doesn't look to have a super high ceiling. Past that, a Josh Green, he was a lottery pick, or not a lottery pick, a first-round pick, just outside the lottery. A couple years ago, he doesn't even play that much, but he's a young guy, I guess, right? And then other than that, there's not really much. I mean, I guess, what do you want to say? Frank Ntilikina, kind kind of just a bench guy for him that they picked up, who at this point we know what he is, and even then his shooting splits are god awful, but we know what he is. He's a defensive guy, not really a high ceiling guy anymore. So that's your young talent on this team, and then you're stuck with a bunch of, mediocre vets, and especially for a couple years, right? Because Porzingis' contract is massive, and doesn't end for a few years. You also have a guy like Dwight Powell, who's just a mediocre vet. You have a guy, obviously Boban's cool and all that to have, but he's not going to raise your floor or anything like that. He's more just a decent guy for spot minutes. Maxi Kleber, he has his role as kind of a good power forward shooter for them, kind of can defend a little bit and stuff like that. Tim Hardaway, right, big scorer for them. His scoring, though, has gone down. He's only averaging 15 points per game this year. Last year, he averaged almost 17 points per game. So his scoring's gone down. His efficiency has really had a decline this year, going below 40% from the field and down to 33% from three, whereas last year he shot almost 40% from three and almost 45% from the field. So his efficiency as well has gone down pretty drastically, which is part of the reason his scoring has gone down. But we know Tim Hardaway is, he's a decent scorer and stuff like that for you. Not going to be much more. Dorian Finney-Smith, a guy that I think a lot of people look at as almost in that Rocco mold. Obviously Robert Covington hasn't been as good this year, but when you look back, he's more of like a Rocco mold player. He can hit some threes. He's going to play defense. That's what you're getting out of him. He's having a pretty good year this year so far. Career high in points per game, shooting almost 45% from the field and just over 37% from three. So he's having a pretty decent year for them this year. And yeah, that's most of your guys. Yeah, you've got a Willie Cauley-Stein. You've got, like I said, Reggie Bullock. You've got a Trey Burke, who's averaging about 7 points per game. But nothing else really to show a ton of potential on this roster. So it leaves you wondering, where can the Mavericks go? Right? They traded a lot of picks to get Porzingis, and now at that point, I think they're mostly done with those picks, like not having those picks anymore. I believe most of those picks have been drafted from by the Knicks or traded somewhere else. But as you're kind of coming to the end of that and you kind of have your assets back, what do you do? And that's a big question, because right now there's a lot of rumors of like who could be available around the league, right? You're looking at the Pacers. They've definitely had some rumors around both their bigs. That Karis LeVert's been in rumors, so maybe you try and target one of them. You do have the salary in which you can make the moves, as you have multiple guys on like $10 million contracts, like a Reggie Bullock, like a Dwight Powell, or you even have Porzingis, if you really wanted to shake up the roster, who's making about $31 million per year. Some other places you look to target, maybe Sacramento, right? Maybe you try and get that second ball handler on the perimeter next to Luka that might be more concrete than a Jalen Brunson, right? Or a Tim Hardaway, and maybe you go after like a De'Aaron Fox if they decide to move off him and kind of stick with the other guards that they have there, or maybe a Buddy Hield becomes easier to acquire. So there's some ways that you can look to move this roster. Now there's no really big time stars available because the Dame things have kind of gone away. Bradley Beal things have kind of gone away. It looks like both those guys want to stay loyal to where they are. Cool, all that, but you're not going to get either of them. And then if you're looking past that, what are you going to target? Ben Simmons? Ben Simmons next to Luka Doncic just doesn't seem like it would lead to much, just because they're kind of going to get in each other's way, as they're both very good playmakers, but Luka can shoot and is just clearly better than Ben Simmons. So that whole thing just wouldn't make sense, and you're going to have to give up too much to get him anyways, especially with what you have on the roster. Like, you'd probably have to give away a Jalen Brunson and like a Tim Hardaway or a Porzingis plus picks, because that's what Philadelphia wants. And at that point, you're making your roster worse than it is now to acquire a guy that might work next to Luka. So it leaves you in an interesting position, and it makes you wonder, has this front office not done what it needs to the last few years? Luka's now in his fourth year, so you've had 3 off seasons to really target players and build around him, and you have been unable to do that at all. you have failed him really to this point in his career as a front office, because you haven't surrounded him with pieces to really highlight his game. Other than the one trade for Kristaps Porzingis, where you got Tim Hardaway and you got Porzingis, two guys that have been staples next to Luka the last few years. Yes, you brought in a Dorian Finney-Smith, and yes, you had drafted a Jalen Brunson, but you haven't brought in any high-end talent, and you haven't really made moves across the roster to really make things happen. Like, yes, a Dwight Powell is a decent player or whatnot, but could that $10 million be spent somewhere else? Or could you not be spending $10 million on Dwight Powell? Could you not be spending $10 million on Reggie Bullock, and maybe you targeted a better player? You look at like a DeMar DeRozan, a guy that he's having a MVP type of year for the Chicago Bulls, leading them to a top seed in the East, averaging over 28 points per game. He's playing phenomenal, and you could have had him. You could have had him for the contract that he's on. You probably could have had him for a lesser contract. Like, there's so many ways that you could have had DeMar DeRozan. He would have been staying in the same state, right? So that's, I guess, a little bit of a plus, so he doesn't have to move. I think that's something we don't always think about for NBA players. But you could have had like a guy that's having an MVP type of year next to Luka Doncic, and I think he showed how his three-point ability, or his lack of three-point ability, isn't hurting the Bulls. So I don't think it would be hurting the Mavericks. And I think having a guy like that would be huge for this team. But they didn't go out and pull the trigger on something like that. Or even a guy like Kyle Lowry. Like, you didn't, obviously he was done in a sign-and trade to be brought to Miami, and he's been pretty big for them. But you could have brought him in on that same contract and then tried to move him in his final year if you felt that he was too old or if he regressed too much or whatever next to Luka. But he could have been a game manager for Luka. He could have really showed him the ropes. Kind of like how Luka played with Dirk the first year, and it was kind of a passing of the torch. Well, Kyle Lowry really could have taught Luka how to win, right? Because Kyle Lowry's a guy that's been in the playoffs repeatedly. He's won an NBA championship when he had Kawhi Leonard, that he could kind of follow behind for that. And so if you were able to bring him in to the Dallas Mavericks, I think that would have done a lot of stuff too. Because, you maybe had to trade away at Josh Green and something else, or whatever it might have been. Because obviously, Miami was able to acquire Precious Achiuwa, so maybe you trade away Josh Green and are protected first, and maybe a Dwight Powell to help with money or whatever. And then you get a Kyle Lowry. Like, that would be so much better for your team than having those other assets that you would trade for Kyle Lowry. But instead, the Mavericks have been complacent with the players on their roster, and just overall haven't tried to make a big splash to really pair Luka with another star other than their one attempt at Porzingis, which mightily, in hindsight, has kind of failed, right? Especially for the contract that they've given him, I think, more than anything. And it almost appears that they've grown scared to make a move, right? You made that move, it didn't turn out the way you wanted to, even after you paid him, and it makes you look like you're afraid to take another chance, which I totally understand. It's not like we're talking about, some 7-Eleven that tried to switch out a candy they were selling, right, for something different, and they got a bad response. No, this is a NBA organization that is, billions of dollars, lots of money's on the line. You want to be putting out the best product forward. You want to be winning. You have a young player and all that, and I understand that. But looking at, I think one of the smarter owners in the league, and Mark Cuban, a guy that I respect a lot, when you look at him and see that he hasn't pressured the general manager to really, yes, take his time, but also make moves for the now, is interesting, because it's been 4 years. So if you had done like a take your time type of plan initially, that makes sense. But to be already at 4 years, yes, you've got him on his max, and I don't see Luka really ever leaving the Dallas Mavericks. It just kind of feels like one of those guys that's just going to stay there, especially the way the city and the team has embraced him, and he kind of got that torch handed to him from Dirk and everything like that. He just seems like he's going to be there for his career. So to not, for his whole career, be trying to make moves to constantly have a good team. And I'm not saying trade away all your picks for James Harden, right? That's not what I'm saying. First off, that I don't know how that fit would go. It would probably go well in hindsight, but I'm not saying trade away your future young players and everything like that next to Luka. I understand having a younger team next to him, and obviously that makes a ton of sense since he's a younger player. But that, like I said, the DeMar DeRozan, the Kyle Lowry, these moves that were available, that people rumored, that made sense, and in hindsight look even better if you would have made them, are weird to have not made. And I think is where the problem needs to be looked at. Especially when you're going out and you're, Rick Carlisle had his whatever disagreements with Luka Doncic, ends up leaving, and then you decide to go hire Jason Kidd, a guy who really has no good track record as a head coach. And again, I talk about that more in that other video, so if you guys want to see more about that there. But to hire a bad coach and to not make aggressive moves to build a competent roster around a young star, it leaves in question how much the Mavericks want to win a championship versus want to just be in the middle of the pack. Because if Luka Doncic is relied on as your sole guy to put you as a top seed, it will happen eventually. I'm certain of that. But it's a bit rude to your star to look at him and say, hey, we're going to put some kind of meh guys around you, you do you, and that's how we're going to do things. We're going to do it the Bradley Beal way. The Bradley Beal way does not work for Washington, and Luka Doncic, I think, is a far more talented player than Bradley Beal. Now, Bradley Beal is in his prime and everything, doing stuff there, but I think when we look at their careers in retrospect, once they are both over, we will look at Luka Doncic, obviously, as a generational player, and as a guy, an all-time great, probably, if he keeps on his trajectory, and especially if he's able to win a championship. But the way that this team continues to construct the roster, that leaves in question if he'll ever win a championship, or if he will stay long-term. Because like I said, I think when I look at Luka Doncic and the Dallas Mavericks, I see Luka as a Dallas Maverick for life type of player. But if it gets to a point where it's kind of like a Dirk thing, where it's iffy on if he's ever going to win a championship, I don't know, just because of the way that the league has changed now, I don't know if he'll stay like Dirk did. We could see him leave like a Kevin Garnett or something like that if the winning just doesn't come. So I think that's something the Dallas Mavericks really need to focus on, and that's really just what I wanted to talk about today. Just how the Dallas Mavericks haven't made the moves to become a super great roster, especially as the West has weakened in this last year with lots of injuries. This was a year to really go for it for them, I think, and they didn't, and it's kind of disappointing. But there's definitely still time. We've got the trade deadline coming up here pretty soon. I'm interested to see what moves they potentially make there to try and make more of a push here, as the West has continued this year so far to look depleted. And yeah, I want to see how far they can go in the playoffs. So hope you guys did enjoy. Make sure you guys drop a like, subscribe for more. Let me know your thoughts on the whole Luka Doncic situation and what the Dallas Mavericks can do to become true contenders this year. It's been your boy Dom from NBA Now, and I'll catch y'all next time. Peace out, guys.